this day, for this moment. I've been invisible my whole life. I guess I won't be anymore, will I? They'll remember me now.
Batman has always had an abundant amount of fascinating villains. Whether they be the extremely sadistic, the mentally tortured, or a supernatural force, the abundance of interesting characters in the franchise is staggering. One of my personal favorites amongst this amazing lineup is Edward Nygma, aka the Riddler. An incredibly intelligent criminal with an obsession for brain teasers, puzzles, and riddles. His fights against Batman are often way more psychologically focused than many of his other villains, as Edward is one of the only villains in the series whose intelligence is on par with Bruce Wayne's. Over the years, the interpretations of this character have ranged from incredibly goofy to extremely scary, or somewhere in between. It all depends on the tone or style of the story he's introduced in. Naturally, when Matt Reeves' The Batman was announced, I became incredibly interested when the news that the Riddler would be the main antagonist was made known to the public. Considering the dark detective style they were going for, my curiosity for how this villain would be presented went through the roof. What we received in the final product, to me, is one of the most fascinating depictions I've ever seen for Edward. In this video, I'll be going over the influences, psychology, subtext, and character of the Riddler to paint a picture as to why I find the Batman's portrayal of him to be amazing. There was clearly a lot of passion from Matt Reeves and Paul Dano when it came to presenting this character, so I believe a thorough look into Edward will do his character justice. Due to the nature of this movie, I can't go into that much detail about Edward other than his surface level appearance, without getting into spoilers. The story of the Riddler is the story of the movie itself, as he and Batman are tied together like a web in the great mystery. I highly recommend watching the movie for yourself, if you haven't already. As with all Batman stories, this one begins with a Wayne. Thomas Wayne, in trying to improve the crumbling underbelly of Gotham City, introduced the Renewal Fund, a non-profit organization that was committed to providing more funding for many of the near-abandoned facilities in the city. This would have been something positive for the citizens of Gotham to look forward to, if it weren't for Thomas Wayne's fatal mistake. Martha Wayne's deteriorating mental illness and troubled familial background was being investigated by a nosy journalist named Edward Elliot. Thomas initially tried to reason with Elliot, offering him money if he kept his mouth shut about the details, as it would not only hurt his renewal fund, but also the perception of his family. Elliot, however, wasn't budging, to the point where Thomas made a deal with Carmine Falcone to, quote, put the fear of God into him. Falcone is a high-ranking criminal in the Gotham City underworld, and naturally used violent methods against Elliot that ended up with the journalist killed. Racked with guilt, Thomas planned to turn himself and Falcone in for the murder, which possibly made Falcone order the infamous shooting of Thomas and Martha Wayne. The death of Thomas and Martha, ironically, was the event that would create both Batman and the Riddler. Falcone eventually took control of the Renewal Fund, and used it to launder money from the citizens of Gotham, putting more in the pockets of both him and his colleagues, while the public institutions continue to rot. Under the rotting walls of an abandoned orphanage is Edward Nashton, a boy who sang in the choir for when Thomas Wayne gave his speech for the Renewal Fund. Singing Ave Maria, a prayer for hope, Edward began to pray for the Renewal Fund to bring him and his fellow orphans some peace of mind. However, that never happened, and everyone was turning their attention to the newly orphaned Bruce Wayne. Edward naturally had disdain for this, believing that Wayne hadn't suffered compared to him. This sort of goes without saying, but Edward suffers from severe mental illness. What he suffers from in specific is ambiguous, but regardless, being in this damaged institution gave Edward zero peace of mind. An incredibly gifted child that couldn't receive proper treatment for whatever his mental condition is. Later in Edward's life, when he discovered just how deep the conspiracy surrounding Gotham City goes, he donned his new persona.
Hello, people of Gotham. This is the Riddler speaking.
Inspired by Batman's fear-mongering ways, Edward started putting his plan into motion, plotting out ways to assassinate everyone involved in the corruption of the city. Playing a game of cat and mouse with Batman as well, and using him as part of the plan. Riddler's outfit was overtly inspired by the Zodiac Killer, who infamously sent taunting messages and clues to the police that were investigating him and was never caught. Another inspiration was the BTK Killer, who in addition to sending taunting letters to the police, was a home security consultant that used his position to stalk and kill his victims, much like how Riddler works in forensics. The movie presents him more like a Saw or Seven inspired serial killer who sets up intricate games with his victims, enacting vigilante justice on the ones that kept him submerged in poverty and darkness, just like his hero, Batman. Edward takes what he deems as justice into his own hands and brings judgment of his own accord to the corrupt officials of Gotham. But not only does he successfully do it, but he also floods Gotham City by blowing up the seawall, bringing additional suffering to the people of Gotham as punishment for ignoring his own. In addition, Edward collaborated with people that were part of his social media following to add to the kill count, using them to gun down anyone who would evacuate to safety during the flooding. Though his plan is ultimately ruined, the Riddler leaves quite a mark on both Batman and Gotham City itself. While Batman did have experience with criminals before, nothing could have prepared him for a mind this depraved. Now that we've explained the basics of Riddler's life, we can delve into the psychology and role he has in the story. There's an entry from Edward's journal that perfectly describes his outlook on the world and why he does what he does. If you want people to understand, really understand, you can't just give them the answers. You have to confront them, torture them with horrifying questions, just like they tortured me. Much like the journals of real-life psychopaths, Edward's journal reads like someone on the verge of going on a killing spree. This is a very clear indicator of his narcissism and antisocial nature. Part of the reason he created the Riddler in the first place was because of the attention it would bring him. Attention that he desperately craved due to his neglectful and torturous childhood. Where does a narcissistic psychopath go for attention? Twitter, of course! He acquired a following quickly due to his killings, with supporters of his being in both the streets and on social media. Fellow sadists that feel downtrodden from the world, that gather to spread the same violent message as the Riddler. It was in his depressed state where Edward found his obsession with puzzles.
Now, ever since I was a child, I've always loved little puzzles. For me, they're a retreat from the horrors of our world.
They were the only thing that kept him happy in the world, and he naturally developed a compulsive need to solve them. While I am not in the position to psychologically analyze anyone, let alone a fictional character, I believe this is an indicator that Edward has some form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. It's also entirely possible that Edward could be on the spectrum. Of course, none of these disorders that Edward may or may not have turned him into the monster he became. I'm simply pointing out that Edward didn't receive proper treatment in the orphanage, and this likely made his mental state worse over time. In accordance with his obsession with Batman, Edward made him a crucial part of his plan. Every single crime scene that Batman investigates is a paper trail leading him directly to Riddler's master plan. However, there was one fatal flaw to Edward's plan. He didn't account for the fact that Batman views him as a psychopath. All this time, Edward believed that Batman would be on his side, as their similarities are too great to list. Both were shaped by trauma, and both seek to take out quote-unquote justice on those who deserve it, in their view. They are both men consumed with vengeance, and use their masks to enact that rage on others. Once Edward finds out how different they really are, he snaps, realizing that Batman isn't on his side.
No! This is not how this was supposed to go! I had it all planned out!
He even sings Ave Maria to calm himself down, as well as give a subtle clue about the eventual flooding. Written by Franz Schubert, Ave Maria is a song quite often used for religious baptisms. Thus, the Riddler's plan is to ultimately baptize Gotham City, to cleanse it of the sin that's been festering within. The flooding ultimately leads to the deaths of both corrupt and innocent individuals, and causes mass chaos. Undoubtedly, the Riddler was a strange form of a reality check for the Batman. Bruce realized in this battle that vengeance won't be enough to save anyone, and that he needs to inspire more hope and less fear. All the Riddler ever did was inspire fear, but he wouldn't have done it without the influence of Batman. Bruce views this as his fault, and feels that he owes it to the city to be a symbol of hope for the people, and a symbol of fear for the depraved. Contrasting Edward, who was a symbol of hope for the depraved, and a symbol of fear for the people. Like many real-world psychopaths, Edward's lack of attention and traumatic upbringing led him to do unspeakable atrocities. The Riddler is a dangerous example of how even the slightest form of institutional corruption, as well as social influence, can lead to nightmares beyond even vengeance's dreams.
It's time for the lies to finally end. False promises of renewal. Change? We'll give them a real change now. We've spent our lives in this wretched place, suffering, wondering why us. Now they will spend their last moments wondering why them. Hey guys, thanks for all the comments.